Next, we have the regulations and steps for equipping nursing centers with generators. And our moderator for this particular panel will be our Senior Director of Quality Affairs, Debbie Franklin. So please welcome Debbie to the stage.
Come on, guys.
And Debbie's panel can probably start to come on up.
Okay. All righty. Good afternoon. I'm not sure who was the wise person that put regulations right after lunch, but you know, I think it's the regulations that'll keep us awake, right? 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 Kind of chairs.
I stole my.
I'd like to introduce our panelists. We have an awesome group of brain trust up here, so hopefully we can answer all of the panelists' questions, all the questions that come up afterwards and that I've already received. Our panelists are Skip Gregory with Health Facility Consulting, who is the former Agency for Healthcare Administration Plans and Construction Bureau Chief. Dale Calhoun with the Florida Propane Gas Association and Natural Gas Association. John Wiseman with Core Construction. Bill Truitt, Charlotte County Commissioner. And Andrew Legros with GE Power. Let's start with you, Commissioner Truitt. Can you tell us about the county and local requirements?
Yeah, I can give a little bit of insight on that. First, I want to say thank you for inviting me here. Having just sat through the EOC this last storm in Charlotte County, I did get to experience a lot of things firsthand, and part of the issues were with nursing homes and ALFs not having power and having patients dependent upon oxygen, having to be put in special needs shelters where then oxygen became a scarce commodity. So I think that this is a great topic. I think it's on task to where we may need to go, and I will say that the timeline is a little bit more aggressive, as you've already heard, than can be met. So on a local level, whether it's a county or a city, you know, we all have our own ordinances. And some ordinances have, or some cities or counties have more stringent ordinances than others. You have processes by which you have to go through, which you're going to hear about permitting and the different agencies and things that you have to look at. But from a county perspective, we have some existing facilities that may not have the room on site to put a generator. So when they come and they make an application, after they've done all the research with the consultants and the engineering firms and got their stuff put together, we may have to look at how we can help them meet this need, because they may have parking issues and we may need to take part of their parking lot to be able to provide for a location. There's a process for that. Our county, I pulled our team together and I said, what are we willing to do to help? And I think every county and every city is going to have to do this. What can we do to help with this process? And I think that is to allow some administrative changes within certain purview so that they can meet the requirement of having a generator and be able to serve their community within their facility. There are setback issues potentially. There could be noise issues that you have to deal with. All these things have to be dealt with, and I've talked with the Florida Association of Counties as well, because I think we need to be at the table having the discussion as to where we're going to come into this and help get this moved through as quickly as possible. Again, the time frame is pretty much unrealistic at this point. But there's some other things that concern me about the order and when it comes to regulation that don't necessarily deal with county government, and that is putting your emergency preparedness plans up online. That is something that may be an issue when it comes to security, Homeland Security issues, things like that. There's some, very important information and very, I'd say, secure facilities that you don't necessarily want the general public to know about. So those plans and all should be shared with emergency management and public safety, who have to approve them locally. But I don't know that putting them up on the website is really a best practice, if you will. So that's some of the things that I'm going to talk about. I'll interject further, and I'll go ahead and turn it to the next panelist.
Thank you. thank you so much. If the county level is not enough to tell you all the regulations that have to be met before you can install your generator, show of hands, how many thought you went to Home Depot and bought them and plugged them in? Skip Gregory, would you enlighten us a little bit about the state level, the Agency for Healthcare Administration requirements before you can install generator or your fuel, or any upgrades for that matter?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me okay? So I'm going to tell you something that no other speaker up here will tell you, and I'm obliged to do this under the National Fire Protection Association pamphlet, our code, Life Safety Code 101, as a trained fire safety inspector. The exits to this room are directly behind you, which lead into a foyer area. From then, you can go to the stair. There are two other exits on the left and right of me, and they lead directly to the stair enclosure. The fire alarm system is a loud whoop, followed by a voice announcement. Thank you. That's a requirement for gatherings over 300 people. I am a code geek. I read code to my wife in bed at night. It puts her to sleep very quickly. Better than PM Advil. I was the bureau chief in the Office of Plans and Construction for, I think, 17 or 18 years. I am no longer the bureau chief. I retired in 2010. Scott Waltz, who is sitting over there at that table, is the bureau chief of the Office of Plans and Construction. So I am not speaking for the agency. I am speaking about the agency. And I have nothing but good things to say. So, as Debbie said, all the plans and renovations that take place in nursing homes, hospitals, and ambulatory surgery centers must be submitted to the Agency of Healthcare Administration, Office of Plans and Construction, for review and approval. Those plans must be signed and sealed and dated by a licensed Florida engineer for all of the generator requirements that we've been talking about today. If you go on the website, the ACA.myFlorida website, and go to Plans and Construction, under Plans and Construction section, there is a listing of forms and presentations. Scroll down to information for project review and read that pamphlet. That will tell you everything you need to know about how to go about submitting a document to the Office of Plans and Construction. There's also a PowerPoint at the bottom of that page written by Scott Waltz and presented by him that also will walk you through that process. But generally, the process is you develop your plans with your engineer, and these generators may require additional construction and renovation to your nursing home because you probably will not have enough electrical room in your electrical rooms to do this work. So then you're going to have to think about an ICRA, an infection control risk assessment, and a ILSM, the interim life safety measures that you're going to put in place, or your plans will not be approved by the Agency for Healthcare Administration. You will have to have a life safety plan of the entire building, and then you will have to have the details of the generator installation, which are signed and sealed, as I said, by a Florida registered engineer. It's unclear at this point what kind of generator is going to be required. It just says generator. There are two basic kinds of generators that are recognized in NFPA, National Fire Protection Association 70, which is also called the National Electric Code. You will find them defined under 701 and 702 sections. 701 is a legally required standby generator, and 702 is called an optional standby generator. They're very, very different in their requirements. In the building code, existing, because we have gone through a number of hurricanes. This is not our first event, as it is for some of you. I've been doing this since 1992 under Hurricane Andrew. After that, we wrote and revised the building code to harden healthcare facilities, nursing homes, and hospitals, and to add additional requirements to their generator capacities. We did this at the behest of the legislature, the statutory language in the legislature. At that time, we picked 72 hours of connected load and 48 hours of nameplate, or 100% load of the generator, because we felt like that was the number of hours that was being used and is still being used by emergency management planning criteria. 96 hours is footnoted in NFPA 99, for instance, but it's not a requirement by any other entity. And we're not sure what the 96 hours is. We don't know whether that's connected load, or we don't know whether that's nameplate rating at this point. So to tell you how these plans are going to be reviewed, I can't, because the emergency rule that was promulgated is too vague to make that understanding. I will tell you that in the Florida Building Code for new facilities, we wrote the following. If the facility does not have a permanent on-site optional standby generator, that's the optional standby generator. Optional standby generator can have a manual transfer switch. Does not have to meet the level 1 requirements that are much more involved than a optional standby generator. And this optional standby generator basically just backfeeds the normal branch. It's a optional power source to the building. So if you don't have an optional standby generator to operate the entire normal branch electrical system, which would include the HVAC, there shall be a permanently installed pre-designed electrical service entry for the entire normal branch electrical system that will allow a quick connection to a temporary electrical generator. This quick connection shall be installed inside of a permanent metal enclosure rated for this purpose and may be located on the exterior of the building. So that's how we handle new nursing home facilities that are currently being designed and constructed in the state of Florida. The process by which these plans are reviewed, there are 10 electrical engineers in the Office of Plans and Construction. They will be the ones that will be doing the engineering reviews. They are located in Tallahassee, Miami, Orlando, and Tampa. Once the review is complete, and that would include breaker coordination studies perhaps, ground fault studies, monitoring of the electrical system, as was mentioned earlier on. Once all that information is gathered and submitted, the engineers then will review it, and if they approve it, then the system can go forward to be ordered and installed, and then the agency will come out and send their electrical engineer to be sure that the documents that they approved have been installed properly, because sometimes the contractor will find a less expensive manufacturer or vendor and then change some of the components. And because these are integral systems, you can't just willy-nilly go and change a breaker for one type of generator that it was perfectly designed for. So it's a complicated process. Now, it's unclear in the rule, because the rule says the local fire marshal within 10 days will go inspect the facility. But ACA also has statutory obligations to do these inspections.
Very good. Andrew, you're an engineer for GE Power, and this is your specialty. What's the time frame when you start working with a facility, doing the drawings, engineering, to submit it to, does it take before you can actually submit this proposal to the agency plans and construction?
Well, I worked as a consulting engineer for a long time with ACA and Skips Group. And then right now I'm a kind of a consultant with GE to the consulting and engineering industry. And it typically depends on the complexity of the job. It could be a 90-day process of just the design, because you have architecture involved, and then all the MEP trades, mechanical, electrical, plumbing trades, that all have to come together, coordinate.
So that
And-
goes back to the former technical panel of that beautiful artist rendering that we saw up on the screen, correct? With all of the different...
Yes, that would be the riser or one-line diagram. And that's just the electrical portion of the project, let alone any mechanical changes that I don't think has been discussed yet, but to meet these requirements, there may be mechanical equipment changes that are also required in addition to the generator, to perhaps make the mechanical system smaller, or more optimized, duct them so that they only provide conditioning for a area of refuge, so that it's a combined effort between architect, engineer, ACA, local AHJs, because even though it goes through ACA, which is an extensive process with multiple reviews, you also have to go through review and permitting through your local building department, and in addition to that, review through your local fire marshal. So these projects will be at least 3 different permitting agencies just for the construction of the facility. Once you get to a certain level of what we call construction documents, those will be submitted to contractors for bid in the typical process, and that could take a couple weeks for them just to provide the bids to do the work. And some of this can be done concurrently. You can send out early construction documents that haven't been approved yet to try to get them, the contractors, expedited, and so there's some concurrencies, but the design process is long. I don't think on a larger scale project something could be done before 90 days. I would say is the least amount of time.
Very good. And you're bringing us right up to, John, your core construction. You guys build a lot of things, but one of the things you specialize in is assisted living and skilled nursing facilities. Take us through the process. You've been hired as the general contractor to put in a generator.
First thing is get a good microphone. Next thing is tell your client we're not going to get it done in 60 days. That's just, I don't see it under the current paradigms that we're dealing with. It's not going to happen. I put together a PowerPoint, so it's easier to look at a PowerPoint than it is to look at me. So I think we can pull that up. And my friend Mike Dodane, we were comparing notes yesterday. He's the engineer that was on the last panel. And he said, I only got one slide. You got a whole bunch. I said, well, it's because engineers are boring. So, so let me just walk you through a process that whether you have to upgrade your generator or put a new generator in, and you may not have to take a lot of notes because at the end I'll show you a link. You can get this and anybody can download it. So this is kind of like at the theme park, it's like a cartoon version of the map you're going to have to follow to get this done. But the first step is design. We've all talked about that. And you've got a lot of different entities within your own organization that have to figure out what you want on the system and what you don't. Next slide, please. So you have to figure out where you're going to put all this stuff in your building. Are you going to have to build a new space to put these panels in? A lot of these things have to be answered before you even get to the generator. And then you have to have basically a checklist of what is going to go on that building or what's going to go on the generator. How extensive and how deep are you going to go into your facility to provide power, and then that's going to give the designer something to work on.
So John, I want to be clear for everyone to understand, this is not the generator you're seeing on the screen.
No, this is only the emergency panel for a facility this is a nursing home generator capable of powering the entire nursing home. It has a room all by itself just for the emergency equipment. It's next to the regular it's next to the regular electric room where all the other equipment is sitting. So if you can imagine that diagram you saw in the last panel, there's 2 different rooms that all that stuff is in. So next slide, please. Again, that's just another one. That's a much smaller version, but same thing. This does about half of a facility. And this, again, this is just the inside equipment. Haven't even got to the generator yet. That is a whole building generator. The next one, if you go ahead to that, the next slide, that is a half building generator. That's a man standing in front of the generator. Just to give you an idea of the size. Yeah, that's the beige part at the top is the actual generator machine that generates the electricity. The black part at the bottom is the diesel fuel tank. So it's called a bladder tank. So it goes underneath of the equipment. Kind of serves as a dual purpose. It also gets the generator higher up off the ground so that you're not as concerned about flooding. And we've made these slabs of different height, but ideally you want the generator to be higher than the finished floor of your facility in case there is flooding. You know you should be okay based on a 100-year storm, but I think we just had one of those in some areas. Sure. The thickness of the slab is designed for uplift. You know, you get a big wind and a big machine like this, it's going to carry the wind, and it can literally get pushed over in the wind. So the foundation actually goes very deep into the ground. It's there to basically ballast the generator, keep it from blowing over or blowing away in a windstorm. And all of this has to be, you'll get a structural engineer involved, not just an electrical engineer, a mechanical engineer, and then back to the structure to get it all through. And then one thing we haven't talked about is all the fire safing of all the new wires that have to go in. Those all have to be, God forbid you ever have a fire in your building. You don't want all these new holes that you've created in your building to allow fire to move through places it didn't used to be able to move through. I'm sorry, I have to get up to see my slides. My wife asked me who was going to be on the panel. I said a bunch of smart people and me, but I had smart people put this together. You'll have 2 automatic transfer switches. Then the code requirements, there's a separate 2-hour rated equipment room. That's part of the process. Then the new feeders that I talked about, and those have to be fire safe as well. And then there's going to be a lot of demolition, core drilling, and just basically reworking of your building to make all of this happen. And all of this has to be permitted as well, all in addition to the generator. The next slide, please. Now, permitting, the different entities involved. First and foremost, you have ACA, which Skip spoke to very well. I talked to our local building official, and these are the different departments: building, zoning, fire department, air and water. Bill spoke to the planning commission, possibly if you got a loss of parking. Again, this is going to take up 2 or 3 parking spaces if you have no place else to put it. And then the county commission if you're going to have to violate setback requirements because you've got some 25-foot rules and other rules as far as setbacks, or if you're trying to put this in a place where you can't put it and your neighbors don't want to hear it, because these generators usually run once a week or once a month just for testing. And then construction logistics, we're dealing with limited space. A lot of you are dealing with, you have very tight sites, most of the ones we built. We're using every square inch of the site already. There's going to have to be a shutdown of your systems during changeover. This is not a 15-minute process to change over the power. This is, your power is going to be off for probably a day to get all the systems checked. And then you have to check and double-check everything. There's a lot of elevator companies and air conditioning companies that are making a lot of money right now because we've shorted out systems in buildings because we've hooked up temporary power and it didn't like it. So generator power is not like regular power. Generator power, or regular power is kind of like a nice Chardonnay you'd get from Napa or Sonoma. And generator power is kind of like box wine from a convenience store. So some of us can deal with box wine from a convenience store, but we don't like it too much. So that's what generator power is like for most of these machines, and they don't like it very well. So you have to double check all of your systems in order to make sure they're going to work right. Now, just one of the things that came up in discussions was the idea of elevating the panels outside of the floodplain. or in case you do have flooding. And in a lot of hospitals, I think this is the case. Mr. Gregory can speak to that better, but you can literally do this, but it is very expensive. Or if you want to put your electrical systems on a higher floor, it's just a matter of wiring and dollars. Give us enough dollars, we can solve your problems, but it takes a lot. But this is something else that can work as well.
Very good.
Thanks.
Skip, hearing all of that, and the current regulations for skilled nursing facilities, how does that compare to the current regulations? I'm not talking the order, I'm talking current regulations. How does that compare to the current regulations for hospitals? Yes, Skip.
Okay, so there seems to be some confusion about hospitals and other types of healthcare facilities and their generator requirements. In the rule, in the building code, Florida Building Code, under the hurricane provisions for hospitals, which is, if you want to look it up, section 449.4 in chapter 4 of the Florida Building Code. And if you want to look up, see what nursing home says, you look under chapter 4, section 450.4. Those are the hurricane requirements added to the building code after Hurricane Andrew, and they have been revised continually since that point, since the time we put them in there. What you will find it says is that, I actually have it right here, that the hospitals and nursing homes, it's up to the facility what HVAC systems go on the generator. Selected HVAC systems as determined by the facility and other systems required by this code. The other systems required by the code, of course, for a level 1 generator are those life safety systems, including fire alarm, egress lighting, exit lighting, nurse call, medical gas alarms, and critical care outlets in the operating room and other critical care spaces in hospitals. Hospitals are not required to run their HVAC systems off of a generator. It would be very huge generator to do that for very large hospitals, and some hospitals have actually done that. There's not just one generator. I think the University of Miami has 4 or 5 very large boxcar-sized generators that they have added to their building. But that is not a requirement. That is that they did that on their own. The requirement is you have to connect the fans in the duct system to the generator, because in hospitals and nursing homes, we have positive and negative pressure relationships. Isolation rooms need to be negative, generally. Operating rooms have to be positive. You don't want to spread infection in the healthcare facility. So those kinds of systems are required to be added to the generator. Not the cooling, because that would size the generator beyond capacity of the hospital. What some hospitals have done since 2004 and 2005, when we had those terrible hurricane seasons, they added quick connections to their hospitals. There were one hospital, major organization in the United States that has 26 hospitals in this state, added 26 quick connects over a period of several years so that their hospitals would not have problems they had in 2004 and 2005, which were sweating in the operating rooms to the point there was water on the floors because of condensation. So they have rental generators that they will plug into their hospitals to operate not necessarily the whole hospital, but certain parts such as the ICU, the NICU, the operating rooms, those areas where patients cannot be transferred or relocated. There are other healthcare facilities that do not have this kind of requirement. Those include ICFDDs, intermediate care facilities for the developmentally disabled, and those people are generally bedridden inpatients, LTACs, long-term acute care hospitals, again, bedridden patients, completely, totally bedridden, ventilator-dependent patients, critical access hospitals, and generally acute care hospitals and hospices. None of these facility types have a requirement for generators to run their air conditioning systems.
Thank you, Skip. Dale, one of the questions that has come in is that you may be able to help us on the gas arena is, any thoughts on how this rule might impact EPA considerations? Is that another regulation that we'll be dealing with the increase in the gasoline, storage of the gasoline? Go ahead.
Regarding gasoline, I can't speak to
Well,
that,
for-
but with diesel,
Yeah.
yeah, there's going to be a lot of storage tank issues. I would say with propane use and potential for natural gas use, that there will not be any of those issues. In fact, those two different commodities are exempt from all your storage tank issues, our regulations. And going back to the rule, I think there's a lot of ambiguities out there as far as what that fuel type is. As the earlier panel spoke, there's probably some better technologies out there other than generators. Those microturbines are perfect for these type of situations in high density urban areas where you may not be able to have the footprint of a generator. And then also in those high density urban areas, you can't have the storage tanks. There's just no way to have them. You can't keep storage tanks inside. Putting them in the ground, especially diesel, you're causing a lot of regulatory leaking issues, that type of thing. So I think all those things should be considered, and also the fuel type should be as well.
And Skip, currently what is the Florida regulation for skilled nursing facilities and using natural gas?
Currently, NFPA 110, which is the standard by which level 1 and level 2 generators are installed, says that for on-site, you have to have on-site fuel storage, and then they make a statement, somewhat vague, I don't have the code in front of me, but it says something like, unless the natural gas utility can guarantee you that they will have uninterrupted supply to that site. And so there are, some areas of the country that have been able to obtain utility letters that guarantee this uninterruption of natural gas to the site. In Florida, we have never been able to get such a letter from natural gas suppliers, and so therefore, presently, under the present standards, we require, for natural gas generators, we require co-fuel on-site storage, either propane or diesel, to have that capacity for on-site in case that off-site fuel is interrupted. And I don't know, the emergency rule did not speak to that particularly, but I guess there is an answer going around, and I don't know what the answer is, I don't want to say, because I've seen two answers already.
Okay, Dale, did you have something to add to that?
Sure. I'd like to speak to the natural gas situation, and especially with the previous question from the earlier panel, when they asked if natural gas was cut off to Florida during Katrina. Natural gas was not cut off to Florida in Katrina. That is a huge misperception out there and great miscommunication. In fact, during Irma, I did a survey of our natural gas utility members, and there were only 307 customer accounts that lost natural gas, with which majority of those were residentials, and they were very small breaks in lines and that type of thing where a tree had uprooted. So I would probably guess there was a lot more diesel tanks, and I hate to say it as well, but propane tanks, more than 307 that ran dry during Irma. So it's a very safe fuel, and with the biofuel engines where you could switch off to propane or diesel, it's basically an endless fuel.
Thank you. This emergency rule requires that the generator be functioning in 60 days. In your professional opinions, can that be done? And if not, are there alternatives? And I will let anyone grab it.
No. So to speak to that just a little bit, if you have any type of special exception, planning board type of process you have to go through because of a challenge of an existing site, there is a application process, there's a fee, there's notice that has to go out. The Planning and Zoning Board or Board of Zoning Appeals must address that. Then it has to go forward to the Board of County Commissioners. That in of itself is a 60-day process if it's already made application, okay? So just from a regulatory standpoint, unless we can waive, which I think the board could probably do, and some boards may choose to do that. Like I said, I think our board's ready to do whatever we have to do to help the situation. I don't know that all other 66 counties feel the same way that we do, but I've got a feeling that a lot of them have a different insight after having gone through this recent event as to what they may be willing to do and not do. The challenge is that when you have that process and you waive it for one thing, my county attorney is going to tell me you're going to get asked to waive it for another thing that somebody else is going to say is a critical need or a critical process or what have you. So we're always challenged by these things. And I think that, from a standpoint of can it be legislated? Sure, we can have the state legislature guide us and tell us we have to do something. But when you talk to local governments, they don't like being told all the time what they have to do. But sometimes we have to work together, and this is one of those situations to find the best solution. You've got to have the League of Cities and the Florida Association of Counties together to work on that aspect of it. And as you've already heard from the previous panels and from these folks here, Skip, what's the timeline for an ACA review on something like this?
On something like this, Scott Waltz has told me that they will go to the head of the line and push everybody behind. And then if the engineer has an opportunity to look at it, then it would take him, depending on the size and complexity of the project, probably from 4 to 16 to 24 hours to review the project, and then another day to write comments up and get the letter out. So you're probably looking at a week, I would say, generally.
And what I wanted to point out by this is that you can see from a state agency and a local government that we're identifying with the goal and what we need to try to do to help solve a situation or a challenge that we have in our state. And the next thing is going to be is how many engineering firms do we have that can come out and handle this load on these number of facilities that are going to be faced with making this transition, plus the time it's going to take them to do it. So there's no way in my mind that this can happen in a 45, 60-day, 90-day period. We were talking, and John and I had spoken about this before, I think 8.5 months with how many thousands of units that may need to be coming on board. You can talk to it, but it's 8.5, 9 months today, whereas you add all these new applications, if you will, there's going to be a huge backlog.
And we've actually done these, and we tell clients it's 9 months, and that presupposes it's a 6-month lead time for the generator. So from the time that you sign a contract to do this, if the generator is going to take longer, that's going to extend the overall permitting time. If it's shorter, it'll shorten it up a bit. And as we were preparing for this, we had our folks do a study of just if you could get the generator at Home Depot, the big one, the big dump truck size at Home Depot, you'd still be looking at 4.5 months under the circumstances before Irma. Now, a lot of things can be done to accelerate that, but I believe, if everybody is cooperating from the governor all the way down to the guy who's hooking the thing up at the end, the best you're looking at is 3 months to do this. That's if you all started today. And then everybody's trying to go to the counter at one time, so I believe that's going to push things back a great deal. So it's a long process. And as I said today, we all agree. We've all been talking amongst ourselves, the professionals. It's an 8 to 9 month process right now.
Okay, Skip, one of the things that you just mentioned, you've obviously talked to our current ACA plans and construction, and we appreciate that, but we received this question in that says, recently it's taken 60 to 90 days to get on ACA's calendar to submit a project for review and then another 60 days for review, will ACA add more staff or streamline the approval process? Will Governor also mandate local reviews be streamlined? And I believe those are all questions that we can answer and say that they are possible solutions to the issue.
Yes, I certainly wouldn't want to answer that for ACA. ACA will have to make the determinations and within their capabilities. I will tell you they're going to do the best they can. You send in a plan and they're going to get it reviewed, and because this is obviously the priority. I would like to say one thing, however. I'd like to say two things, actually, maybe more. I don't know. This is not the first time that a catastrophic event anecdotally has changed code requirements. If you recall, in 2003, there was a multiple death fire in Tennessee in a nursing home that was not sprinklered. I believe it was 7 people died in that terrible fire incident. After that time, the state of Florida and the federal government passed and enacted rules which would require all nursing homes in the United States to become fully sprinklered. The state of Florida also passed that. State Fire Marshal passed that rule. What was the time frame? Was it 60 days? No. It was 10 years. 2013, the federal government said all nursing homes in the United States had to be fully sprinklered. State Fire Marshal was quicker than that. He said by 2010, all nursing homes in the state of Florida had to be fully sprinklered. And guess what? He also did a loan guarantee program to help those sprinklers be installed in those nursing homes. So I would just say, let's get a grip on what we're doing.
Okay. Our next question to the panel is, does current regulations require hurricane enclosure and lighting protection for the generator base tank? Any of you? I have a wonderful panel of experts.
Does it require that?
Engineer, you want to answer that one?
If it's a level 1 generator, then it would have to be impact rated enclosure, which adds a considerable. It can either be built around the generator or it could be built inside of a CMU brick wall, but that adds additional complexity to and cost to the project and space.
And if this is a level 1 generator. If this is an optional standby generator as permitted in the National Electric Code, we wouldn't necessarily have to do that unless the rule would say that you did.
Okay. Next question from our audience. Does the order change the definition of critical power required for existing buildings and or new buildings in the ACA plans and construction queue? And if,
Yeah, I read the rules to all buildings.
okay. Considering the number of existing facilities within the state from a time, expense, and overall electrical coverage needed to power most of the facility, how is the alternate source of power approach going to be viewed to meet the new generator requirements? As we know, the new CMS regulations, the new emergency rule talks about alternate source of power.
Let me answer that? Okay. I've read through the CMS rule, which, by the way, goes into effect November 16th, I think. Is that correct? This year. It was written last year, so you've had a year to contemplate it. I believe that they say in the rule a generator is not necessarily required. Now, there are alternate methods, such as we were talking about quick connections. I believe that if you're going to use under the CMS rule, if you were permitted to use a temporary generator, rental generator, you should pre-engineer that with a quick connection on your building. Otherwise, we saw and I've done all the damage assessments since Hurricane Andrew, and you would be quite surprised at what you see people try to get away with under these kind of conditions. They're unsafe, and so the only way to really do this is to pre-engineer that with a quick connect. And I did forget one thing about ACA. Agency for Healthcare Administration Plans and Construction does not review assisted living facilities. That has to be completely done at the local level. Only nursing homes have to go through the agency review.
Thank you, Skip. That was an important point. This next question, my question deals with regulations. We have the regulation panel here. With this new order for generators and cooling, the building may not be able to maintain 80 degrees with current HVAC when the building patient load goes above planned occupancy. Because obviously we have facilities, even if they have a generator, they're in the zones that can have the surge and flood, so they have to evacuate anyway. Need mechanical inspector to address. So obviously with the new order, you can't have temperatures lower than 80. But if you have taken in another building, you're going to have additional occupancy, and then how can that even be done?
Can I address that? One of the things that we could do to lower the HVAC demand is to recirc more air than bring in outside air. And that's going to be a balance. But there's a lot of outside air requirements, so you're drawing in hot, humid air, then conditioning it, and then essentially exhausting it eventually. That takes a tremendous amount of energy to do that. The more you recirc air, the less HVAC equipment that you need. So maybe there could be a provision under certain emergency situations that they could provide a transition over that would recirc more air than bring it outside. Therefore, you get more bang for your buck for your existing system.
But here again, I think you're talking about those mechanical changes that you discussed earlier.
Yes, those are 100% mechanical changes.
Yes. Okay, the next question. Since the mandate is strictly for common areas, I'm sorry. Sure. Wait, microphone.
See if we can get one of these to work.
HVAC systems are designed to achieve 72 degrees under normal load. So if we're only shooting for 80 with additional people, it may be a push in there. So I think, I don't know where the 80 degrees came from, but you have extra capacity at the 80 degree mark because you're designed to be down here at 72.
Thank you. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Bob, loaning us some of your expertise from your panel. The next question. Since the mandate is strictly for common area AC for 96 hours, what about the lighting in that area? Is the plan to segregate a new common area branch circuit for this area as power will be lost to the rest of the facility at this point? Please clarify.
Typically, the designs that I had worked and seen, there's a critical branch power that we would use for dining areas, common areas, those type of spaces in the nursing home. So it's not necessarily code minimum, but it seems to be a pretty widely accepted practice in the design of new facilities.
Yes, new facilities are part of building code. Again, from the hurricane provisions, you have to supply lighting for all of the patient and support areas. But that's new code requirements. All existing nursing homes constructed prior to 2004 would not necessarily have any lighting. And I've been in a lot of hospitals, believe me, after hurricanes, where I needed a flashlight to walk around.
In a lot of the design of facilities you see today, like a room like this, maybe half the lights would be working on generator and the other half would be on regular power. So you'd still be able to see to move around, but you look for economies wherever you can in the design to lower the load on the generator.
And toilet rooms are not necessarily those lighting circuits, so you'd have to add toilet rooms. We want to be sure that that's still functioning. Sewer operational and water in the home.
the lighting has become a lot less electrically intensive, so those lighting loads have dropped off due to new technologies like LED. So you can get a lot more lighting on the same amount of generator than you could 10 years ago. So that's kind of a positive note.
Very good. We have both types of providers and suppliers in the room, assisted living and skilled nursing facility, and this comes from an assisted living provider, and they would like to know if the assisted living generator be the same as nursing homes, and I'm assuming that that question isn't related to the governor's rule.
Well, the study we did of all the assisted living and skilled nursing facilities we've built the last several years, they were very similar. The assisted living, and they're not required, but they're doing it, I think, more from a marketing and security of the residents, letting them know they're going to be okay. They're very similar. Nobody's really doing the patient rooms, but they're doing most of the common areas and a lot of lighting and the air conditioning system in the common area and where they prepare the meals and serve the meals.
Well, I'm not the expert panel here, but I will tell you that I read side by side the assisted living rule with the nursing home rule, compared it word for word, and the only word that has been changed is assisted living and skilled nursing facility. Okay, next question. Someone said Florida Building Code does not require hospitals to run HVAC system from generator. Are there any requirements anywhere that requires them to condition to 80 degrees? Oops. We're
Can you hear me?
on a roll here with our mics.
Okay. Is this okay? Actually, no. HVAC stands for heating, ventilation, air conditioning. Ventilation, the V, yes. All new hospitals have to have ventilation, as I said. ASHRAE 170 is the standard under which hospitals and nursing homes must comply. And ASHRAE 170 talks about ventilation in certain areas that we just talked about, isolation rooms, operating rooms, procedure rooms, those kinds of areas. But it's under normal operating conditions, the temperature ranges given in ASHRAE 170, and I sit on that committee too, those are under normal operating conditions, not under emergency generator conditions.
Okay, thank you. Many nursing and assisted living facilities are on a larger campus. Will a conditioned one generator supported area on the campus, not in the licensed space, meet the requirement? So I believe my understanding of this question is that could you have an air-conditioned area in maybe one of your unlicensed, maybe the independent living facility? And that might be an agency question we'll have to ask. You guys agree?
Well, because of the wiring and the size of the wires, there's a level of diminishing returns when you're running electricity so far. So usually in a larger facility, you've probably got 3 or 4 different electrical rooms where all this stuff is at. So at some point, it doesn't make sense to run a wire so far to cover emergency power for a facility.
Okay, very good. Okay, we're good with, go ahead.
I just want to, I thought this was working. It doesn't like me. There's just one other thing that I would like to add. We're having this discussion today, and we're assuming some things that I think we need to take into consideration. What we're assuming is that we have a workforce to do this right now. We have a very challenged workforce to do this, which is going to add to the timeline as well. And so as we're rebuilding our state in areas, there's going to be a stress on labor. There was already a stress on labor in our state. And so I think that this is going to add to the timeline. I know electricians, I'm a builder also, so I know electricians that cannot keep people because people jump for 50 cents or $1. And it's very difficult right now to maintain a workforce. So it's going to be interesting to see, how this works out when the actual implementation process gets through design, permitting, and everything else, how the timeline is for getting these installed, this many of them. So I just want to bring that up.
Okay, John, would you like to close? Okay.
Well, I'll echo what Bill is saying. We're very nervous about labor 2 weeks ago before Irma got here. And when you look at some of the hardening of buildings, repair of buildings, this exercise, which is, I believe, in long term, it's very important. It's going to serve very well. I'll take a personal moment here. During the storm, my mother-in-law is on oxygen. And so we went and got her, brought her back to our place. And then when the storm came, we evacuated to an ALF I built 2 miles from my house, just because I was so concerned about her being on oxygen. And for those of you who serve in this industry, it really didn't hit me before that you all have families you have to care about too. You're caring about all of our loved ones, but then you also have to care about your loved ones. And I was just very impressed and very touched by the facility that I was at and how they cared for everybody who was there, including my mother-in-law. So this is a very important thing we're doing, but it's going to take a lot more time, and we're all going to have to be patient and be very, very wise in how we move forward.
Debbie, I just wanted to touch point on, they were talking about labor. I think just the actual materials and supply is going to be very short. Labor is one thing. The skilled labor, as they said, has been a big shortfall for the state over the past few years. The building industry has been growing. But just having the amount of wire and the generators, getting them built in time, as they said earlier, they don't just take those out of a warehouse and drop them on a truck. So there's a lot of other parts and pieces of this that are going to slow this down.
Well, that labor includes design as well. I mean, this is a very, senior housing is a very specialized area of design, and there aren't many engineers out there that do this very well. And so that's going to be a serious backlog to people like Mike and the others that are in the industry that serve the senior housing world.
Skip?
Okay. Okay. So I think some people think the emergency rule is a silver bullet that's going to answer all our problems in terms of protecting residents in place in their homes, and it isn't. It's a very complicated process to protect in place and to shelter in place. You have to consider surge zones, number one. Did damage assessments in Mississippi after Katrina, and the only thing you can do about surge is run. There is no other way you can explain it. If you saw the damage, and maybe some of you were over there, that the surge left. There is window protection and exterior unit protection requirements. Even if you have a generator, you can't occupy your nursing home if the interiors have been ripped out by the storm. There's also protection of rooftop mounted equipment. The HVAC that you're supplying power to, if that is not protected from large missile impact and from being blown off the roof, you'll have a generator running, perhaps, but you'll have nothing else for it to be connected to. So it's a multifaceted problem. This is A in the alphabet of emergency preparedness.
Wait, Skip, before you give that away, we have a question for you. For Skip, doesn't the new CMS requirement mandate a capacity to maintain temperatures on emergency power?
Yes, it does. The way I have read the rule, there are alternate methods of compliance with the way you do that, and they're not really specific about it. There's one S&C letter put out, and I am not expert on CMS, but I believe that they have said that mobile generators would be permitted to maintain those degrees. But you're right, in this new CMS EP coming out now, that is a requirement, but then it all goes back to your emergency management planning criteria in paragraph A and B. So I guess we'll figure that out as it goes forward. I think the ACA guys are getting training on that. Maybe the question needs to really go to them after they get their training from CMS.
Okay. Andrew, any more thoughts?
Yeah, I just from manufacturer standpoint, I know that I can only speak for GE, but we're really trying to create the logistics for all these disasters. Because it's going to put a large demand on manufacturing, so we're trying to prioritize what pieces of equipment we need to start focusing on manufacturing of And a lot of that has to do with generator integration equipment, switchboards, the quick connects, the manufacturer. So we're working on those logistics right now.
Very good, thank you. I think what I've heard from the panel today is that it can be done. There are different ways of doing it, several different ways of meeting the outcome, but there needs to be more time. Correct? Thank you so much. Join me in thanking our panel.